are the biggest problems you see with horror protagonists? Because, it's almost a cliche. You're like, why are you doing, like, you're yelling at the screen, don't go in there. The killer's in
Yeah.
there. What is the biggest problem you see with protagonists in horror films in general?
I think that you pretty much hit it on the head. I mean, I think a lot of movies require, and I'm sure like there are movies that I've written where this happens too, but when you require, because the thing is, audiences, I read this somewhere where a psychologist said that film audiences always think that they're braver and smarter than the people on screen. So like, when a character wouldn't do something in the film, there and the audience are like, well, if I was there, I'd have jumped on that killer's back and done it. But the worst thing you can do is have like, and I've seen so many good movies just get undermined by this, where they just have the main characters stay in a location when any rational person would
Right.
have left, and do stupid things that any rational person wouldn't do. So if you have a character that keeps making bad choices just to keep the story going, that's the biggest mistake I see. I've read so many scripts where it's like, this isn't even movie talking. This is like a human being. Like, I cannot think of any person, no matter how tough they are, that would stay here after what they just saw.
Right.
Like, I read a script recently where, a person gets invited to like some mysterious party and doesn't know who invited them, and walks in and there's like some weird orgy going on, and she backs up into some strange guy, and he's like, oh, don't worry about that, follow me, I'll show you where the host is. And I'm like, the person would be gone at that point. She was horrified by the orgy. It wasn't like she saw the orgy and was like, that looks fun. She was like horrified by it. And so who's going to follow some strange man? So when I read stuff like that in scripts, especially when it happens over and over again, I think that's the biggest mistake I see in horror films, is making your characters continually do silly things just to keep the story going.
Well, when I was thinking of three films specifically that are horror films that are so good that they transcend the genre almost, which is Jaws, Exorcist, and Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
The stories, the characters, everything is so well constructed. There's never a moment in Silence of the Lambs I'm just like, don't like, why are you doing that? Like Jaws is perfectly, it's as perfect of a film, it's period, as you can get. And The Exorcist, like the situation is structured in a way where, well, the priest is trying to get the devil out of this girl, so he has to be in there because that's his job, as opposed to, let's all split up in the woods,
Yeah.
so the killer can knock us off one at a time.
Right. And you don't get a pass, because I see a lot of this in the scripts too, where people will be like, really? Now you want to split up now? Have you seen a horror movie? And then they still split up. It's like, that doesn't give you a pass by acknowledging.
Exactly. Now, well, and that was the perfect thing. Well, that started with Scream, when Scream actually was so self-aware of its own faults.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a brilliant script, and that's a
Yeah,
brilliant.
I love Scream. That's one of my favorites.
I mean, it's so brilliantly done, and the first opening sequence with
my God.
Drew Barrymore. I mean, it's the Psycho. You're killing.
Brilliant.
I mean, spoiler alert: first 10 minutes, Drew dies. But it was shocking for a new generation. It was basically what Psycho did back in the day. But it was so brilliant. I remember when that came out, it was just like a revelation. Like everybody, it was such a monster hit at the time.
Well, it's funny because I went to a screening of it and I didn't, I saw the poster in the trailer. I thought Drew Barrymore was the star of it. So I just went in there with my sweet ass going, well, I can't wait to watch Drew scream for like 90 minutes and I was like, what? What?
What's going on?
I know, it's like one of the most brilliant 10 minutes of cinema.
Yeah, it's amazing. Now, we know what the problem is with protagonists, but what can you do as a screenwriter to make a horror villain legendary? Because we've already rattled off a handful of names that are, all you need to do is just say their first names, and in the horror genre, they know what it is. So what do you do? Like, what makes Michael Myers, Freddy, Jason, those characters so legendary, as opposed to other horror either franchises that either come and go, that have those kind of, it looks from the poster the same elements as Jason or Freddy, but they don't live up to it, and they don't. What's that magic? What's that thing, in your opinion?
You know what? I think I don't think that there's I don't think that that's almost an answer because it's almost like catching lightning in a bottle.
Hmm.
Because sometimes the characters are so like you mentioned Silence of the Lamb, like Hannibal Lecter is such a delectable, like with just the portrayal and the way that he was filmed and everything was that it's mesmerizing. So sometimes you have villains like that, or Freddy Krueger, I think is probably the best example of the slashers, because especially in the first movie, like he was so feral and so there was just something so wicked about him. Like he cut himself, he cut at people. He was just horrible. Like we'd never seen anything like that. And Chucky too had such a distinct, it's a toy. It's like it looked like a little toy. You almost had as much fun with the Chucky movies when the doll's getting knocked around, knowing that it's possessed. Like so, there's something about that. But I think with Michael Myers, he didn't say anything, and it was just he was this embodiment of evil. But also that movie came out at a time, we were kind of in, the suburbs. Everything was about the suburbs and how the suburbs were safe and the last bastion of safety in America. And, Michael Myers came in and kind of took that over. And with Friday the 13th, like people forget, Jason's mother was a killer in the first one, and he wore like a sack over his head in the second one. He didn't get the hockey mask on the third one. And I think that by that point, just where our culture was at the time, slashers are so hot. And that just happened to be the one that like exploded. Friday the 13th exploded. I don't know if it was necessarily because of Jason per se.
Timing. It was timing.
I think it was timing on that one. Because again, most people think of him with a hockey mask. And it's like, well, he didn't have the hockey mask till the third movie. And he wasn't the killer in the first one. So I think timing has a lot to do with when certain movies take off and when certain movies hit. But I think...
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but I think when you create a villain for a horror film, especially if it's like a slasher film, you do kind of want to come up with some kind of iconography, some kind of look that's unique, where people will like they'll remember that killer if your movie's fortunate enough to like really strike a chord with people and take off. Like that sucks about Final Destination. It's like we could have had a Halloween costume and a toy line, but we don't because we don't have a killer. So.
But we have five. But we have 5 movies and hopefully a 6th coming.
I love the movies, but it's funny because it's like, because I love like collecting like
Right.
movie posters and statues and tchotchkes. So it'd be nice to. It's like, can't have one for mine, but that's all right.
They should actually sell the statues of the kills. So, like the sequence of a kill, like that should.
That would be awesome. Like the log going into the sheriff's car.
Right. Exactly. All those kills.
On the balance beam in the 5th one. Like I love that kill too.
Yeah, but you look at things like Leprechaun, and I'm like, how did that become a thing? Like they ran off. Like how many of those are there? They just took off. So and then something like Candyman didn't. Like there should be 20 Candymen.
Yeah, there should be. I mean, well, what's interesting too is we have to also look at the time when these movies came out as far as what was accessible. Mm-hmm. So, back when I was young, there were like 3 networks and HBO. So everybody was watching the same things. And so people were seeing the same movies. There weren't as many movies that were coming out as there are now. So, you didn't have when scary movies came out, like everybody rushed to see them. But everybody across the country was seeing like the same movies and watching the same things on television. Like back in the day, it was like 60 million, viewers was like a hit for a network show. And now it's like, well, we got 10 million viewers. It's a hit. So, the country used to be the choices used to be a lot more limited. So a lot of the people would get around, especially the horror fans with reading Fangoria, you'd see what was coming up in Fangoria. And then all the horror fans would rush out and see those movies. And they're cheaper to make and they turn a profit. So I think that's why you have a lot of horror franchises. They seem to have burned themselves out a while ago, just because I think the marketplaces got bigger with like the streamers, and so many theater chains now with so many movies coming out. Like you really have to like rise above all the clutter out there.
Right, and like Candyman's I think it's in the can already. The Jordan Peele remake of Candyman.
Yeah, it was going to come out this month, but they had to push it. But Candyman's one of those movies. I mean, it definitely appears in like the top rated. As far as it's a beautiful movie. Um, but I do think, people, I don't, I like to say it delicately because people get their hackles up when you start talking about race at all.
Hmm.
But, you
Yeah.
have to look at the time when that movie came out.
Right.
And, it's basically an interracial love story. And, people weren't quite ready for that. I mean, I just read in '85, there was when they put out Commando, there was a love scene between Arnold Schwarzenegger's character and the female lead, but when they cast Radon Chong, they cut this love scene out because they're like, the country's not ready for this yet. And there was still a lot of that, I think, ickiness that people had about interracial relationships. And I'm like, screw you, because if it wasn't for interracial relationships, I wouldn't be here. So
Right.
fuck yours. Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
but but it was a different time back then. So but I mean, that movie's from the acting, directing,
Yeah, I remember it. It
Tony
was,
Todd's. I mean, everything is like, it's a masterful movie. Such a beautiful movie. And I thought the sequel was good too. I like the sequel a lot. But yeah, it did. I think the reason it probably didn't take off is it wasn't the hot teenagers getting slashed up. It was like dealing with like racial inequality and racial injustice, and it also had an interracial love story at the center of it. So I think people, I just think people weren't quite ready for that at the time that it came out.